She called me unstable, said I wasn't mentally competent, claimed I was some kind of drifter with no husband, no real career, living alone in a shoebox apartment. My father, Richard, was shouting so hard his voice echoed off the courtroom walls. The veins in his neck stood out like cords, and his face had turned a frightening shade of deep red. He leaned forward and jabbed a trembling finger straight at me. "Just look at her, Your Honor," he yelled. "She can't even speak for herself. She clearly needs a conservator to control her trust fund before she wastes it all on whatever unstable people waste money on." I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, calm on the outside. I glanced down at my watch. 10:02 a.m. Exactly on time. Judge Sullivan stared at him over the rim of her glasses. Her face gave nothing away. No anger, no sympathy, just calm. Then she leaned forward and asked one quiet question that cut through the room like ice. "You really don't know who she is, do you?" At the table beside him, my father's attorney, Bennett, stopped cold. He had just been handed a document by the bailiff, and his eyes were glued to the page. The color drained from his face so fast, I honestly thought he might pass out right there. Before I tell you what the judge revealed, the thing that made my father's face go completely white, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I like knowing who's part of this community. That courtroom silence wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy, pressurized. The kind of silence that vibrates, like the moment right before a dam finally breaks. I didn't look at my father. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing a tear or even a twitch of my mouth. Instead, I focused on the tiny dust motes floating through a beam of sunlight that cut across the defense table. Watching them drift pulled me back to Christmas Eve, just 4 months earlier. We were sitting at the long dining table in his house, the same house I was secretly paying the mortgage on. Richard had actually laughed when I handed him my new business card. He tossed it onto the table like it was trash. "A consultant?" he sneered, swirling his expensive scotch. "Is that what we're calling unemployed these days, Ila? Cute little hobby, sweetheart, but let's be honest, you're just playing pretend." I remembered the heat flooding my face that night, that familiar sting, the feeling of being the disappointment, the failure, the invisible daughter. But sitting there in court, that memory didn't hurt anymore. It energized me. Because while he was mocking my cute little hobby between bites of roast beef, he had no idea that same hobby had just landed a $15 million federal contract auditing a corrupt pharmaceutical supply chain. He saw a drifter. I saw the CEO of Vanguard Holdings, a forensic accounting firm that specializes in finding money that doesn't want to be found. And right now, the money I was tracking down was his. "She's catatonic," Richard shouted, snapping me back to the present. "Look at her. She hasn't said a word. She's obviously medicated or having some kind of episode. I demand full conservatorship immediately." I calmly adjusted my cuff, feeling the cool metal of my watch against my wrist. Let him yell. Let him turn me into the fragile, broken little girl who couldn't keep a husband or a mailing address. That image worked in my favor. If I defended myself now, I'd just look like a rebellious daughter arguing with her father. But silence? Silence made him look unhinged. Silence let him keep talking. Silence let him dig a hole so deep he'd never climb out. Then he went after my living situation. "She lives in some rundown rental downtown," he said. "She won't even let family visit because she's ashamed of how she lives. It's probably squalor." I almost smiled. He was talking about the Meridian. He was right about one thing. I didn't let him visit. But everything else was wrong. I didn't live in a rundown rental. I lived in the penthouse. And I didn't rent it. I owned the building. More than that, I owned the building where his law office rented its space. Just last month, I'd evicted 3 tenants for late payments. And my father, the brilliant legal mind, the so-called titan of industry, never once realized that the signature on those eviction notices belonged to me. By now, Bennett was visibly sweating. He tapped frantically on his tablet, scrolling through the document the bailiff had handed him. I knew exactly what he was reading. It wasn't a summary of my grandmother's assets. It was a breakdown of mine. I wasn't here fighting for an inheritance. I didn't need my grandmother's money. I made more in 1 quarter than my father had made in his entire career. I was here because he tried to take my freedom. He tried to weaponize the legal system, the same system I'd spent my life mastering, to erase me. And now he was about to learn that the unstable drifter he'd bullied for 29 years wasn't prey. She was the shark. I finally looked up and met Judge Sullivan's eyes. She gave me the smallest nod. It was time. The trap was set. All we had to do now was let him walk straight into it. Judge Sullivan was slowly flipping through the financial dossier Bennett had submitted. The soft swish and snap of paper turning was the only sound breaking through my father's heavy, uneven breathing. Richard was still putting on a show, straightening his tie, puffing out his chest, glancing toward the gallery like a gladiator soaking in applause after a kill. What he didn't realize was that the beast he thought he'd slain was actually the bank, and the bank was sitting 5 feet away from him, wearing a navy blazer and an expression of complete boredom. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not to hide, to remember. I needed to ground myself. I needed to remind myself exactly why I was here. I needed to go back to the moment the ledger first opened. 2 years earlier, Richard's firm was bleeding money. I knew that because I'd accessed his accounts, though hacked might be too generous a word. His password was Richard1, the number 1. Because of course it was, he genuinely believed the universe revolved around him. He was 3 months behind on payroll and buried under high-interest loans. He was desperate for a lifeline. A normal father would have swallowed his pride and asked family for help. A humble man would have downsized. Richard did neither. Instead, he tried to have me committed. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because it was the same day I finalized a massive audit for a tech giant. 2 police officers showed up at my door with a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold order. My father had forged a doctor's statement, a golfing buddy of his, claiming I was a danger to myself, that I was delusional, that I was burning through my inheritance on imaginary companies. His plan was simple: lock me away for 72 hours, file an emergency motion, take control of my trust fund. He didn't want to protect me. He wanted to liquidate me so he could pay his office rent. The officer stayed 5 minutes. That was all it took. My clean apartment, my calm demeanor, and the federal agent's badges visible on my laptop screen during a conference call made it painfully obvious the report was malicious. I didn't press charges. That would have been too fast, too kind. Instead, I chose a slower solution. I decided to become the answer to his problems and the architect of his downfall. The next morning, I created Vanguard Holdings, a shell company with a deliberately vague name and a registered agent in Delaware. Through Vanguard, I approached his bank and offered to buy out his toxic debt. They were thrilled to unload a failing client. I bought everything: his loans, his credit lines, every financial rope he was hanging from. Then I injected a fresh $650,000 into his firm, posing as a private equity angel investor. Richard didn't ask questions, he didn't run background checks, he didn't vet Vanguard. He just saw 6 figures hit his account and assumed the world had finally recognized his brilliance. And what did he do with the money I gave him? Did he pay his staff? Upgrade his ancient legal software? No. He bought a vintage slate gray Porsche 911. I remembered watching him pull into Thanksgiving dinner in that car, revving the engine like a teenager, bragging about his record-breaking quarter. He sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey, and locked eyes with me. "Maybe if you applied yourself, Ila," he said, wine staining his teeth, "you wouldn't be such a financial burden on the family legacy. It's embarrassing, really. At your age, still needing handouts." I smiled politely and ate my potatoes. I was driving a 5-year-old sedan. He was driving a car paid for by the so-called burden sitting to his left. He thought he was king of the castle, but he never checked the deed, never read the loan terms, never realized that every mile he put on that Porsche was depreciating an asset that already belonged to me. "Your Honor," Richard's voice snapped me back to the courtroom. He was leaning on the podium now, confidence returning. "We are wasting time. My daughter has no assets, no income, and no grip on reality. This silence, it's a defense mechanism. She's scared. She knows she's nothing without my support." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't a monster. He was a bad investment. And today, I was closing the account. Bennett finally lifted his eyes from the paperwork. His hands were shaking so badly the pages rattled against the table. He leaned in and whispered something urgent into Richard's ear. Richard swatted him away like an annoyance. "Not now, Bennett. I'm making a point." "You may want to listen to him, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Sullivan said, her voice cold and sharp. She held up a single sheet of paper, the ownership summary for Vanguard Holdings. "Because according to this," she continued, "the plaintiff isn't just your daughter." She paused. "She's your boss." My father didn't gasp. He didn't stammer. He laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls, stripping away whatever dignity he had left. He shook his head and looked at Judge Sullivan with condescending pity, the kind adults reserve for confused children. "My boss?" Richard chuckled, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, I don't know what forgery she slipped into your docket, but this right here is exactly what I've been talking about. Delusions of grandeur. It's a classic symptom of her condition." "Ila doesn't run a company," Richard sneered. Ila can barely operate a toaster. Bennett made a sound that didn't even qualify as a word, something wounded and panicked. He grabbed Richard's sleeve, his knuckles turning bone white. "Richard," he whispered urgently, his voice shaking so badly people 3 rows back could hear it. "Stop! Look at the seal. This is a federal incorporation document. It's real. You need to sit down." Richard yanked his arm free. "Get off me, Bennett. I'm not sitting down while my daughter turns this courtroom into a joke." He spun back toward the bench, his confidence curdling into pure aggression. He jabbed his finger at me again, stabbing the air like he was trying to puncture my existence. "Look at her," he barked. "Look at that cheap suit. Look at those scuffed shoes. Does that look like a CEO to you? She shops out of discount bins. She drives a sedan with a dented bumper. Successful people don't live like refugees, Your Honor." I glanced down at my shoes. He wasn't wrong. They were scuffed. I'd scraped them climbing through a warehouse window the week before to verify inventory for a client. I hadn't replaced them because I didn't care. Unlike Richard, I didn't need to wear my net worth on my body. "She lives in the Meridian," Richard shouted, convinced he'd landed the killing blow. "That crumbling brick pile downtown. I've seen the address on her mail. She lives in a studio apartment in a building that probably has rats in the walls. And you want me to believe she owns Vanguard Holdings? She can't even afford a doorman." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my face neutral. The Meridian. He called it a crumbling brick pile. I called it a historic restoration project. And when I bought it 6 months earlier, he was right about one thing. There were rats, so I hired exterminators, then contractors. I restored the lobby, rewired the building, and claimed the entire top floor for myself. He thought I was renting Unit 4B. He didn't know 4B was just a mail drop I kept to mislead him. "This is a waste of taxpayer money," Richard sneered, slamming his hand on the podium. "She's unstable. She's alone. No husband, no children, no legacy. Just a sad, lonely girl making things up. Sign the conservatorship order, Your Honor. Let me get her the help she needs before she embarrasses this family any further." He stood there, chest heaving, victorious. He thought he'd exposed me. What he didn't realize was that by insulting the crumbling brick pile, he just insulted his own landlord. Judge Sullivan slowly removed her reading glasses. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked bored. And that was far worse. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, her voice calm and lethal, "I am giving you 10 seconds to sit down and close your mouth. If you make one more comment about the plaintiff's mental state, I will hold you in contempt so fast you won't know what hit you." Richard opened his mouth to argue. Bennett didn't let him. He physically dragged him back into his chair. "Good," the judge said. She picked up the next document from the stack. "Now that we've established your opinion, let's talk about facts." She slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my father's shaking hand. "According to this deed," she continued evenly, "the crumbling brick pile you mentioned, Miss Caldwell doesn't just live there." She paused. "The Meridian. Unit 4B is indeed a mail drop. You were correct about that, Mr. Caldwell. However, Miss Caldwell does not rent the property." She let the words land. "She owns the building, the entire building, including the commercial suites on the 3rd floor." She looked directly at him. "The suites your firm currently occupies." Richard blinked. He stared at the paper, then at me, then back at the judge. His mind was scrambling, gears grinding, refusing to mesh. That's impossible," he stammered. "My landlord is a corporate entity. I pay rent to Vanguard Real Estate. I've never written a check to her." "Vanguard," Judge Sullivan repeated slowly, like she was savoring the word. She reached back into the folder. "That name appears quite often in these filings. Vanguard Real Estate, Vanguard Capital, Vanguard Holdings." She pulled out a thick binder and opened it, the spine cracking loudly in the silent room. "According to your firm's financial disclosures, Vanguard Holdings is your primary investor. In fact, they are the sole reason your firm remains solvent. They injected $650,000 into your operating account 2 years ago. Is that correct?" Richard straightened his tie, grasping at familiar ground. "Yes," he said quickly. "Vanguard is a private equity angel investor. They saw potential in my firm. They recognized my legal talent and backed a winner. They saved us." He shot me a smug look. "Unlike my daughter, who wouldn't recognize capital investment if it hit her in the face. Vanguard believes in me." I watched him unravel in real time. It was almost sad. He was bragging about the rope I'd sold him. "Vanguard believes in you," Judge Sullivan repeated. She turned the binder toward him, tapping the first page. "That's fascinating, Mr. Caldwell, because according to these incorporation documents, the sole incorporator, the chief executive officer, and the primary signatory of Vanguard Holdings," she looked up at him, "is Ila Caldwell." The air didn't rush out of the room. It didn't hiss or fade. It simply disappeared. Richard stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. My signature. The same one I'd written on birthday cards he tossed in the trash. The same one I'd signed on the lease renewal he approved last month without bothering to read a word. No, he whispered. Then louder. No, this is a trick. This is fraud. He spun toward Bennett, his face twisting into something frantic and proud at the same time. Tell her this is illegal. She's not a lawyer. She can't own a law firm. That's against ABA rules. Rule 5.4, non-lawyers can't hold equity in a legal practice. This contract is void. He turned back to me, a manic grin spreading across his face. He thought he'd found the loophole. You stupid girl, he laughed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You wanted to play big shot, but you didn't do your homework. You can't own my firm. It's illegal. You just admitted to a regulatory violation in open court. I'll have you disbarred, or whatever they do to fake accountants. Then he looked at the judge, smug and breathless. Dismiss this, Your Honor. She's not my boss. She's a fraud who broke the law just to feel important. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and for the first time that morning, I spoke. You're right, Richard, I said quietly. I can't own your firm. I stood up. But you didn't read the contract, did you? I walked around the defense table, my heels tapping against the hardwood in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Bennett shrank into his chair as I approached, clutching his briefcase like it could save him. Richard didn't move. He puffed out his chest, still clinging to the belief that a technicality would rescue him. I didn't buy equity in your firm, I said calmly. I know Rule 5.4. I memorized the ABA model rules before Vanguard even existed. I stopped directly in front of him, close enough to smell the stale scotch on his breath from the night before, close enough to see the sweat gathering on his upper lip. I didn't invest in you, I said evenly. I bought your debt. I nodded toward Judge Sullivan. She returned the nod and handed me the thick file of loan agreements. I dropped it on the table in front of him. It hit with a dull, heavy thud. 2 years ago, you were drowning, I continued, pacing slowly. 3 banks rejected you. You were behind on payroll. You were about to lose your license for commingling client funds to pay your country club dues. Richard's face twitched. That was temporary, he snapped. A cash flow issue. It wasn't equity, I replied. It was insolvency. I kept my voice steady. Vanguard bought your loans, your credit line, the lien on your equipment. Then we extended you $650,000 as a senior secured obligation. Bennett flinched. He understood. I'm not your partner, Richard, I said. I'm your senior secured creditor. I don't own your firm. I own the collateral. I pointed to the agreement. Every chair, every laptop, every client file becomes mine the moment you default. Then I tapped the page again. Paragraph 12. Section B, default on character. Insulting your guarantor in a recorded hearing triggers immediate acceleration. I met his eyes. You called me incompetent and a fraud on the record. I glanced at my watch. You defaulted. The loan is due now. The color drained from his face. I don't have that kind of money. I know, I said calmly. You got $12,000 in the bank and 1 maxed out credit card. I turned toward the bench. Your Honor, I'm calling the loan. I'm requesting an enforcement order to seize assets. Bennett shot to his feet. If you take the equipment, the firm collapses. I accept your resignation, I said flatly. Richard finally exploded, shouting about betrayal, conspiracy, a hostile takeover. Then, desperate, he grabbed his phone. I planned for this, he yelled. Server failsafe. I'm filing Chapter 7 right now. A progress bar appeared on his screen. Liquidation, automatic stay. You get nothing, he said, leaning back. The firm is dead. Checkmate. Bankruptcy protects companies, I said quietly, pulling out one final document. But not guarantors. Richard blinked. You signed a personal guarantee, I continued. Paragraph 4, Section C, cross-collateralization. The room went silent. When the business went bankrupt, I said, the debt transferred to your personal estate. I didn't raise my voice. You didn't bankrupt the firm. You bankrupted yourself. I listed it calmly. Your house, the lake cottage, the Porsche, your pension, even the golf club membership. Judge Sullivan brought the gavel down hard. Hearing dismissed with prejudice. Asset seizure granted. Mr. Caldwell, you have 24 hours to vacate your residence. Commercial eviction is immediate. Bennett packed his bag and left without saying a word. Richard stayed frozen, staring at the wreckage of his legacy. I walked out without looking back. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief. That night, I watched a locksmith drill out the office door. The Caldwell and Associates nameplate dropped into a cardboard box. The liquidation team would handle the rest. I wouldn't profit. And I didn't care. That $650,000 wasn't an investment. It was the price of my freedom. At home, I deleted Dad from my phone. Not blocked, deleted. Just numbers now. I stood by the window, breathing in a kind of silence I'd never thought I'd have. Sometimes you don't have to destroy a toxic family, you just have to walk away.